All right, everybody, this is Swiss. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm gonna touch once again on a doubt topic just after the intro. Let's go. All right, guys, I know some of you might have gotten tired of the more serious DAO related videos, and I promise there will be other stuff. But right now, this is the most recent development in Decentraland. This is the new feature that we have just gotten, and it just makes sense to dig into this whole thing while it's still fresh so we can still try to make adjustments so that we can still try to influence what is going to be the foundation for Decentraland going forward. So if we are supposed to use the DAO to vote, to find consensus inside the community, we do need to understand how it works, and we need to make sure that it actually works the way we expect it to work. And there is a lot of tricky situations creating a DAO that functions, especially that the voting points, the voting power may or may not be properly distributed inside the ecosystem of Decentraland. And right now, people who own land and people who own mana do have the majority of the voting power. And it makes sense because the whole logic behind the DAO is to have people who actually have the most skin in the game have the most say. And I think fundamentally this makes sense. If 2 years ago you had the courage to come up with 10,000 USD and you put those into virtual land when nobody was believing in it, you should get some extra benefits when the project succeeds because you were the one putting your money behind that idea. And only because you did that, others might have done that. And only because of that, there was enough funding for the project to have the encouragement and the public opinion to move forward aggressively and to keep on going when it was tough. So I think the guys who invested early on should be rewarded with more say in the project. And the same is true for mana. Of course, you can always argue edge cases here and there, external investors manipulating the system. Yes, I mean, I think all of us could come up with interesting, specific examples where this could be an issue. But if we just remove all of the edge cases for now and just talk about, does it make sense, generally speaking? Is this as a foundation, does it make sense? And I think it does. And now recently there was another proposal saying, well, if we include land and mana owners, what about name owners, right? Every one of us has bought a name, and owning a name represents skin in the game. You have committed attention, time, and financial resources to get a name because you are invested in the project because you like it, and therefore we want you to have a say in the destiny of Decentraland, because there are many people who have not even gotten a name for a variety of reasons. Could be a financial question as well. So they might not be fully invested yet, and they may not have to have as much say as someone who has bought a name. So I do understand the logic there. Of course, there are edge cases, extreme edge cases in the name game as well, where people have bought thousands and thousands of names early on in Decentraland, and now those guys will have a tremendous amount of voting power, and most of you don't even know those guys exist. And then there are, of course, a few guys who have just been regularly investing into names and have maybe a couple of hundred of names. And yes, those guys will have a say as well. I don't mind necessarily for these guys to have more say because they have committed very significant funds buying those names over a period of time. So there are edge cases there as well. The thing is, we cannot sacrifice a good idea because there are several edge cases. I guess this is why we're having a vote. But no one is talking about the edge cases. So I think it's important to bring those up. You should not be surprised for someone to come in having several thousand or 10,000s or 100,000s or millions of voting power because they own 10,000 names. Don't be surprised when this happens. So in order to counterbalance some of these developments, then I ask the question, why shouldn't wearable owners also have more say? If landowners, mana owners, name owners are proving their commitment to the project by owning those assets, those NFTs, and it is customary in the NFT space to get exposure to a project and to its success by buying its native NFTs. And wearables are probably the most important NFT in Decentraland. Therefore, you do get exposure to the ecosystem by buying one of those NFTs. Then why should you be the only asset class that is excluded from the voting process? And this is what the proposal is all about. Let's include those as well. Now, what's important is that the wearables is a tool that is widely penetrated inside the Decentraland community. Like everyone owns at least one or two wearables. I would say, anyone who is really engaged in Decentraland does own a couple of wearables. That means they would have a proportionate amount of voting power assigned to them. And those guys who have committed a significant amount of funds to buy up Decentraland NFTs, to invest into mythic items that were supposed to be very rare in Decentraland, as a sign of their respect and appreciation of the project, but also as an investment into the platform. Those guys should get an appropriate number of voting points based on the rarity type of that particular NFT they own. So if someone has spent 5,000 mana, and I know many people did, to buy a mythic jacket, they should get more voting power than someone who has bought a very common set of earrings, let's say for 10 mana. So there should be definitely a distinction there. But this proposal is not really about the numbers. I think the numbers, this is something we can agree on separately. But the most important question is, do we want to give extra voting power to wearables owners in the first place? And frankly speaking, I think it makes sense. Now, before we discuss this further, there is a very important distinction that we need to be aware of. And in the proposal, the title of the proposal is specifically current L1 wearables owners. Like we want to give voting points to current L1 wearable owners. That means system state of the day of the proposal, snapshot at that day, people who owned wearables should get a specific number of voting points based on the rarity types. This will be discussed in a separate DL proposal. But why do I make a distinction there? Well, we've just introduced wearables minting on the L2 layer. Basically not on the Ethereum network, but actually on the Polygon Matic network. And these two types of wearables are significantly different. First of all, L1 wearables were not mintable by the general community. Only the Decentraland team was minting these for special events to incentivize people to come and to participate. And they were distributed in community events, and people picked those up through putting effort into the game early on. And these were the rare rewards they received for that effort. And if you wanted to own one of those and you did not participate in the event, you had to buy it of other players. And eventually the prices started to go up as the supply and demand mechanics hit. And a lot of those items from 2019, 2020 became more and more valuable over time. And especially as the whole NFT ecosystem started to become conscious of these investment options, that you can get exposure to a project by buying its NFT, these external people started to come into Decentraland, and beside buying mana, they also bought wearables as an investment. And then in 2020, we had two fashion shows where there was a DAO that I did not necessarily participate or I wasn't aware of, but there was some kind of consensus that a set amount of teams should propose their views of how wearables should be designed, and then those could be minted into Decentraland and sold to the general population. So a handful of teams, twice on Fashion Show 1 and Fashion Show 2, did create wearables and did sell those to the community. Now, this was literally a license to print money, because you were able to create wearables for free, and then you could sell those to people inside Decentraland. And it worked. People made small fortunes selling those wearables without putting up any kind of financial commitment that I'm aware of. And the Decentraland team received a small cut of, I think, 30% or whatever that number was. They received these wearables into a special account, and you can see this account being active from time to time. So we are aware of where these 30% of wearables are deposited, and they were supposed to be used to incentivize, to to pass those on to players to incentivize activity. So it is for a good purpose, but 60% of those wearables went to the designers, and they were able to just make money of those, which is awesome for them. And it wasn't maybe as awesome for those who did not manage to get their designs approved, or who didn't know, or who came on later. So there is this L1 layer set of wearables, which is quite significant, that has been minted in 2020, that is also part of that set. And I think because it was a discovery phase, because it was done in collaboration with the Decentraland Foundation, those can also be considered as investment vehicles, or at least hybrids, that we can accept to also get voting power, because they are, those have already been sold into the general community. So if the final goal is to give power to people who are actually using the platform and are actually part of the community, then those are the guys who have bought these wearables and they own them and have them in their wallet. And therefore, if we want to give them more voting rights, more voting power, we could use these L1 wearables as proxies, as a way to distribute that voting power. So it totally makes sense. And even if a couple of people, a couple of teams got a license to print money, they did distribute these among the community members. So those should also be included. Now, the important caveat here that is not in the proposal, and I only mention it in the comments here and there is a set of wearables that has never been minted. Some of the teams who had the license to print money didn't actually print it. They just kept it for some reason for a later point in time. And I don't know how to deal with those guys should this proposal go through, because frankly speaking, we are talking about thousands and thousands of unminted wearables sitting there with a license to print, but they haven't done it just yet. So there needs to be a solution for this one particular point. What to do about the not yet minted L1 wearables? Should there be a deadline until they have to be minted, and then this is the system state that we take, and nothing else can be further minted on L1? And I think there are a couple of edge cases that we need to discuss, or just accept the fact that certain districts or certain designer teams who have a lot of wearables still not minted will have that additional voting power going forward, just because they were part of that project in 2020. So there is, of course, a question there, but it's totally solvable if we all agree that the point is not to strengthen individual parties, but the core objective is really just to get more people into the DAO system so it actually starts working. And you can only get people into the DAO system if you give them something to vote with, right? And even if we are going to pursue that other proposal that we had the other day about delegating your vote, you can only delegate votes that you actually have. So if you want people to vote for you and delegate votes to you, you actually need to give them voting power in the first place. So how would you possibly do that? You need to have a mechanism to do this. And the only mechanism that we have is through ownership of assets, and wearables are those. And now this brings us to the second part. Let's talk about L2 wearables, because L2 wearables now can be minted almost for free. Yes, there is, of course, this 500 mana upfront cost, and it is significant if you want to mint, let's say, a whole set of items. But at the same time, you do get to mint 100 or 1,000 items for that fee, making the item per item price so low that it's almost counterintuitive to agree to that. So there is this dilemma between the actual upfront cost to mint something, but then once you divide it across all of the assets that you get, all the NFTs that you can mint, and we have seen some hats being minted 1,000 times now, and certain pants and jackets minted 100 times, flooding the Decentraland marketplace already now, just a few days in. So the value of the L2 wearables will still have to be explored. And if this is, you know, I think there is just too many unknowns on the L2. And since everything can be minted almost for free or at a very low cost, you don't want people to start getting voting power just based on the amount of wearables that they can get to mint. So either these will have a very low figure, and there are some interesting comments in the forum specifically addressing that issue, how you can translate creative energy into voting power. But this is really outside of the scope of this proposal. L2 wearables, this is something new. It can be minted almost for free. It shouldn't, for now, be included in any kind of voting, I think. And there can be separate voting proposals on that. But for now, this is really about L1 old wearables that we all have in our wallets today. If you have more of those, you get more voting power. You have only one of those, you get only a little bit. You get some voting power for your name. You get some voting power for the mana you hold. So I think with this mechanism, we will have a nice, more equal distribution inside the community. We will have some extremes where certain parties will get a lot more voting power. A lot of the times, those parties already have a lot of voting power, so it will strengthen them. So it is a bit of a game of giving more voting power to the general community to a larger number of accounts, while kind of still accepting the fact that some of the stronger accounts will have, even more voting power going forward. So we really just we expand the participation of the DAO, because more people will have significant or more significant voting power. So I hope this makes sense. I mean, it is a complex system that we have, and this particular proposal here specifically addresses one element of it. We are not talking about how to solve it in the sense of how to distribute it across different rarity types. I think there are many different ways we could do that. But first, we need to decide if we actually want it. And it looks like a lot of people do want it. And it's not a surprise, because most of us own wearables. So we definitely want that. And I think everyone understands that it's good to have more people participating in the DAO, to have a wider selection of opinions and points of views influencing each vote. And only if you have voting power would you feel enticed and motivated to participate. So I think the idea is really good. I think if we want to use wearables to further expand the idea beyond names and mana and lands, if you want to expand on this idea of having a better representation of the community in the DAO, then this is the logical next step. Most people have voted yes. There has been one party that voted no with a very large selection of voting power. And I have found out through some research that this has been potentially done in error. And I'm not going to discuss the specifics of that in this video, but I would say, generally speaking, you can deduct roughly 300,000 voting points from this particular no vote. If you make a mistake voting in the DAO, the only option you have is to change it to the opposite. So you cannot just unvote, from what I understand. So right now we are kind of stuck with this situation. But in any case, I think it would be important, even with that mistakenly casted vote, we should be able to get another 6%, another 50,000 voting points on the yes side, to just make sure that this poll is clearly a yes. So then we can start voting on how to implement it in terms of how to distribute this across the different rarity types on L1. All right, guys, I hope this did provide a little bit of extra clarity. This has been a long explanation, but it feels like some community members really enjoy some of these explanations, even if they're long form. And hopefully, we have just under 24 hours to go on this proposal. I would encourage you to come and express your opinion, potentially still participate in the forum if you haven't done so. And I see you guys in the next video. Thank you for taking the time. Take care. Bye-bye.